What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another video. Today we're checking out the Primarchs, Lionel Eljonson, Master of the First Legion, the Dark Angels. So yeah, I haven't really done anything on Lionel Eljonson. He's been mentioned a few times here and there, and yeah, I feel like learning about him today. So we're going to watch this video. It is a long one, 40 minutes. And yeah, we're going to continue on this Primarch journey. So yeah, without further ado, we're going to get into this video. Of course, you can subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. So be sure to hit that subscribe button and the notifications if you have not. Join our Discord, and yeah, let's get into this. Oh my eye.
Lionel Eljonson was the Primarch of the First Legion of the 20 founding legions of the Imperium. He's commander of the Dark Angels, and he has this pretty crazy and torrid history filled with honor and this great deal of secrecy and a lot of infighting with a lot of his brothers. So with the new Dark Angels Codex just around the corner, and a lot of you guys asked me to expand on some of my 40k knowledge, I figured this is as good a time as any, really, to start with the Master of the First Legion. And this is another new series of videos I'll be doing here, focusing on the Primarchs of all 18, and as we only know, 18 Primarchs, so only of all 18 legions, and their subsequent placements after the Horus Heresy. Think of this as kind of like the Index Astartes that used to be in the White Dwarf. I'm actually going to say Index Astartes. That's the way I like to say it. I don't like to say Index Astartes like I see in a lot of the games. But it's just like the Index Astartes, only not. So before we get into the history of the Lion himself, we have to jump back into a quick prehistory leading up to this point. And this is really to give a complete outside background on the situation, and this is assuming that you don't know anything about the Warhammer 40,000 universe.
Oh no!
So I'm going to do a quick little blurb here on kind of the setting of the pre-Primarchs. So all of this really takes place, or the Horus Heresy, the Great Crusade, all the Primarchs takes place in the 30th millennium. So a whopping 27,000 years ahead of our timeline now, as we live in the 3rd millennium. So the Emperor of Man, being a being that is kind of impossibly old and is combined from these spirits of many powerful, psychically attuned individuals that all gave their lives at one moment to create this one singular soul and entity. They kind of said to themselves, hey, we know the evil that's coming. We are getting eaten when we die and we go into the warp, because we used to be able to revitalize ourselves and resurrect ourselves. We're all dying and getting eaten by the demons in the warp. We have to make something that can fight this. So bam, they actually all commit like ritual suicide basically and create the Emperor. And he's been walking the earth for thousands and thousands of years in secrecy. So the Emperor Man, though, kind of comes to the fore in like the 25th millennium or so, and unifies all of humanity at the end of what's called the Age of Strife in the Unification Wars. The Age of Strife is basically well, humanity was once this huge star-faring civilization, and it had been cut off from all of its empire due to what was called the Old Night, and that's a series of what are these called warp storms that hinder travel out of system. So this is the Age of Strife, and the Emperor then begins work on his Primarch project just after he unifies all of Terra and kind of starts this new golden age, the precursor to the Great Crusade, and he creates a race of genetically enhanced super soldiers called Space Marines. And the Chaos Gods are,
obviously we know all this, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, so I'm not going to talk about it too much.
You know, the same Chaos Gods we've seen in Warhammer or Total War Warhammer, if you're joining me from those series of books, or I'm sorry, games. But they intercede and jettison all of the 20 Primarchs across the galaxy. And so really here begins our story, and the story of every Primarch is from this point on. Each one of their own legions is made in their image, with pieces of their genetic code imprinted into what is called their gene seed, into every Space Marine's gene seed. So thus starts the tale of the Master of the First Legion, Lionel Eljonson. So in order to get a good idea from this, we have to take a step. Where did he land? So while Lion is the Master of the First Legion, he was not the first Primarch to be found. That honor went to Horus. Horus. We'll talk about more in time.
Horus was the first one to be found. Damn it! I mean, I should have known that. How come I didn't know that? I mean, that makes sense.
And he'll always be mentioned as we go through this. But the Lion landed on the death world of Caliban, and many of the worlds in the Imperium have certain designations: Death World, Forge Worlds, Agra Worlds, etc. You can imagine what would comprise a Death World. So hostile vegetation, indigenous wildlife that is also hostile, or a climate condition that is hostile. So essentially, it's a world you're going to die on by any manner of reasons that the world itself can create. So Caliban was once part of the former empire of man, and as thus, it still has a lot of the technology from what is called the Dark Ages of technology. And it's funny because it's not the Dark Age of technology because it's bad, it's the Dark Age of technology because just like our Dark Ages, they forgot about all the fucking technology, so they don't know where it is anymore. So it was a much more advanced time that they can't find. They keep finding these standard construction templates. It keeps finding all these things from the Dark Age of technology that empowers and revitalizes the age that they're currently in. So it's really kind of this weird reverse fall of technology. It's kind of crazy, but as advanced as they all are. So imagine this kind of verdant world filled with castles, knights in this proto power armor. It's this power armor that precursors what their use in the 30th millennium, the Mark 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 power armor, whichever one it is that time, with the precursors to bolt guns and chain swords, and they all ride these kind of enhanced horses, and they fight these chaos warped beasts that they call great beasts, and it's pretty metal, right? So during this time, there was a lot of forearm grabbing, brother shouted in loud tones, and riding off to war. That kind of like
brother.
Very knightly orders. And so the older Index Astartes books didn't really overly describe this time. It just kind of says, oh, he landed on Caliban, he joined a knightly order, yada yada yada. Nothing really extensive. But since the Horus Heresy has come out, the Horus Heresy series, we have a much better idea of what this time looked like in Lion Eljonson's life. For 10 long, torturous years, Lion was in the forests of Caliban completely alone. I mean, he landed and boom, he's there. He's alone. We don't find out until later in the timeline that this was really a time when he was constantly tempted and lured to the dark side. To chaos, corruption by the ruinous powers. And he tells Conrad Kurz, and Conrad Kurz is the Primarch of the Night Lords, but later on that they inhabited his dreams, his thoughts, and were constantly really beckoning him. And it's pretty crazy because no other Primarch has really gone through that crucible of faith that Lion had to go through. And we'll talk about the Night Lords, Dark Lords dichotomy towards the end here. But this is definitely worth bringing up, because he even tells Conrad, when Conrad tries to tempt him later on down the line, he goes, hey, service is good enough for me. That's the reward I need. And even before he knew who the Emperor was, he was already turning his face away from this. And it's just it's a very interesting point because while in the books you're reading it, you don't know a ton about it. And when you find out later in the history that he says, hey, these are the things that shaped me. But at the end of this time, Tsar Luther discovers the young boy and brings him back to the monastery of the Order. And there they name him Lion Eljonson, or Lion, son of the forest.
Lion, son of the forest. That's kind of mad that he was alone for 10 years.
Johnson, son of the forest. Whatever, makes sense. The entirety of Caliban, though, is ruled over by this feudal system of knights, hence the Tsar name, the Tsar title affixed to Luther. And there are multiple knightly orders, all of which have their own lords and knights and adjoining towns, so on and so forth. But they go on these kind of grand hunts to kill these great beasts, these chaos beasts that inhabit the forest, and that the planet is primarily comprised of. Chief of these monsters, though, is the great Calibanite lion, which look nothing like lions at all, save a mane of razor sharp kind of spines that they shoot out from them and shoot them. Crazy.
So it's like every other animal in 40k. It kind of resembles an animal, but it really isn't that animal.
The book kind of describes them like manticores without wings, and not being like lions. It's kind of because their skin is like rock hard, scale-ish type. It's almost like a dragon mixed with a manticore. It's kind of weird, but safe to say, Caliban is a veritable terror nest of grim, dark Cthulhu baddies and chaos warp hell. So after being rescued and inducted into the Order, Lion quickly rose in the ranks until eventually becoming the supreme Grand Master of the Order. Now, this is a repeating trend that we're going to see with a lot of the Primarchs we're going to talk about. They come to maturation much faster than normal humans and can learn and process information much, much, much faster. They have eidetic memories, all sorts of this crazy stuff. And that's inherent in all Space Marines, but it's like turned up to 12 for Primarchs. And like most Primarchs, when they talk about when they fight, they're going faster than even Space Marines can keep up with, and they're like constantly cutting each other, and their wounds are knitting them like almost immediately. So they're pretty crazy beings. but they always excel to surpass their, they always kind of manage to surpass their adoptive fathers, their surrogate fathers. And there's this really great point in Descent of Angels where Lion goes out to kill a Caliban lion and is ambushed, wounded, then eventually rounds about and kills it. And again, he's a Primarch, so he can kind of take quite a beating. But he even counters the Watchers in the Dark and at this time, and that's someone or something that we'll talk more about later, but it's worth bringing up that even this early in Lion's history, he encounters the Watcher of the Dark, which are these kind of robed, very enigmatic, mysterious figures that are quite powerful, but they allude to an even bigger power that they're not even really given form to in a lot of the lore or the books just yet. We know that they might be members of what is called the Cabal, which is this kind of grand cosmic force that works against chaos at whatever the cost may be. But they play a larger role in the end of Lion's kind of story here. But they're worth bringing up here. But this is where the first seeds of jealousy start to crop up in Luther, his surrogate father, and as he's pretty jealous of how far the lion has come in such a short amount of time. He's killed a Calibanite lion, which takes a whole order to go and kill, and he did it almost single-handedly. He's risen to the rank of Supreme Grand Master, well above even Luther. Luther is now his right hand, even though Luther's older than him technically. So there's a lot of resentment going on here, but the two really complement each other. They work very well despite this kind of mounting rift, and it's really important to note how that kind of works out with their personalities. Lion is this cold, calculated, and tactical, while being outright stubborn in his chosen path type individual.
Fair enough.
And it's pretty crazy because Luther kind of like nails it. He says, "Hey, you kind of seem removed from everyone, like you're a step above." And in the book, here's a little quote from it. "Imagine what it must be like to be so," and this is the lion saying it, kind of like reflecting exactly on what Luther says. "Imagine what it must be like to be so singular a creature, knowing that you are alone and that there will never be more of you. These beasts were not driven by hunger, they are insane, driven to madness by their own uniqueness," talking about the great beasts of Caliban. But he's basically saying, like, yeah, you're kind of right, Luther. I am kind of removed from people because it's because I don't know how to really relate to them. I feel like I am removed. In a lot of the same ways that...
Not wrong, he is removed. But he does have people like him. There's another 17.
The Emperor of Man feels when we hear about the Emperor's voice from the book The Emperor of Mankind. But Luther, on the other hand, is charismatic, he's boisterous, he's brave, he's a leader of men. And so both men have a very strict code of honor and conduct that they follow. They're knights after all, but these two kind of use each other's personality traits to fill the gaps that the others have created. So while Lion can't necessarily rouse all the orders to his banner in a kind of charismatic way, Luther can. So that's really what happened. Luther and Lion...
He can't do the infamous battle speech in front of everyone before they charge. He can't do the Jon Snow talk. Who done it in Lord of the Rings? Somebody done it, I can't remember. But yeah, there's always that one guy who's hyping everyone up before the battle. He can't do that. Nice.
Unite the entire planet, all of them falling under the Order, quote unquote. That's what it's called. That's the name of this knightly order, is the Order, kind of original, right? To eradicate all the great beasts on the planet, as well as the Order of Lupus. And that they go to eradicate the Order of Lupus here because it's another knightly order that actually is using the beasts to their own means. So they're like, no, you're corrupted, you're going down. So they basically take out everything. They eliminate the threat of these beasts, which is kind of resided over this planet for a good deal of time. They knock out the Order of Lupus at the same time. But shortly after this, the Emperor of Man lands on Caliban, and he finds that the leader of the planet was none other than his lost son and master of the First Legion, Lion eljonson, obviously. So Lion eljonson then renames the Legion after a Caliban myth, and Luther actually outright says it as soon as he sees the assault packs of these space marines kind of fall down or descend on the earth. He says, "And the angels of darkness descended upon pinions of fire and light, the great and terrible dark angels." So Lion eljonson then names him after this Caliban myth, the Dark Angels. So this is where things get pretty dicey in the hierarchy of the order. To become a space marine, you have to be under a certain age for your body to be able to sustain the growth triggered by the gene seeds and all the surgery that introduces all the new organs, etc., into the body. So this was obviously
So those knights that he's already got can't undergo the surgery, right?
not the case with a lot of the older members of the order, including, of course, Luther. They were instead genetically enhanced, sort of these kind of demi-space marines. This is the same treatment Cor Pharaon received in the Wordbearers Legion, another kind of surrogate father to another Primarch. And there's a lot of talk at this point, right before the Great Crusade gets going, about how the Mechanicum essentially levels mountains and forests to make way for the progress of all this necessary accoutrement of a Space Marine founding planet. So you see a lot of these knights kind of lamenting, like, I remember before this, we didn't have all this kind of fire and industry come to our lands and level everything. So this kind of builds some resentment. This leaves a bitter taste in a lot of the older knights' mouths, and this kind of further cements those seeds of discontent as they kind of blossom more and more as more of this unfolds. But a young knight, Zahariel, he foils a plot by some of the more zealous knights that we were just talking about to destabilize the plans of growth and assassinate the emperor. So Zahariel kind of steps in and
because they could assassinate the emperor. Okay, buddy.
Essentially rats them out. So this kind of quells the resistance on Caliban. And after that, eljonson sets out to the stars with both his surrogate and his gene father, so Luther and the emperor. The Dark Angels quickly become a figurehead amongst the other legions as an idyllic legion, with this kind of this rigid hierarchy, just like there was in their order, this discipline and very effective tactics. And this was the very first legion created by the emperor, so they really had a lot of clout here. They were used as more or less the standard of how a legion, of how a effective tactical force should be. And they were broken up into 6 hosts, all with different specializations. There was the Dread Wing, which was kind of focused on total war, all aspects of fighting from the Space Marines. The Storm Wing, which was focused more on assault-based Marines and the such. The Raven Wing, which was more of a motorized kind of heavy attack bikes and bikes of many variations. The Iron Wing, which is their armored wing. I'm so funny. The Fire Wing, which was, again, actually unknown. We don't know a ton about what comprised the Fire Wing. I would assume it had something to do with both plasma and or fire or melted technology. And lastly, the Death Wing, the elite Terminator-filled wing of the host of the Legion. In fact, we only ever see, after the Horus Heresy, we only see the Raven Wing and the Death Wing remain. The other wings kind of get dismantled and forgotten about because they get inducted into the other 2. But as Lion waged his war, he was pulled to the planet of Sarash to replace the white scars there. And the Saroshi government was kind of saying, oh, yeah, no, we're ready to comply. Let's negotiate, let's fall into compliance, let's become part of the Imperium. This was a ruse, a farce. So after they board the ship that both the Emperor and the Lion are on, the Saroshi Lord High Executor exchanges some not so pleasant words, so the ruler of the Saroshi. And as time has really told us, Space Marines are not ones who take insults on the other cheek when it comes to their master of the golden toilets. So Lion splits this dude in 2, from groin to chin.
Oh. Yeah, they don't take insults very well. And if you are not an equal opponent, which you're more than likely not, you probably shouldn't go throwing around insults at people double your size.
And as soon as he starts uttering insults at the Emperor. And the real kicker is that he had brought a nuke with him on the ship. Something that Luther and the aforementioned Zahariel that we've talked about earlier discover. Now, Zahariel's a pretty consummate Dark Angel, or a pretty consummate Space Marine in general. He's embroiled in all these kind of shitty side plots, and it's because of his naivete and his willingness to really do good. So Luther, on the other hand, has to be kind of talked off the edge by Zahariel. And Luther is eventually convinced to jettison that nuke outside of the ship. And it detonates outside in space, causes minor damage to the ship, not a big deal. But this really kind of does minor damage to the ship, but it does major damage to the relationship between Lion and Luther. He sends Luther back to Caliban with the rest of his forces. I think it's something like I want to say it's like 500 dark angels or something like that, and tells them, okay, hey, you are sent back there in shame. You go recruit for the Legion. And this would really be the last time these two talk as brothers. A conversation and an action that the Lion eventually really, he confesses to this actually being a big regret of his, because there's a lot of kind of a split in his brain. Like, yes, he does this as one part punishment, but as another part, like, I trust you to imbue the vision of the Legion going forward. And I'm sure it was not conveyed.
I mean, that's probably kind of insulting that you get sent home by your best friend, I guess, or by the guy that you've been with ever since. That's a bit deep. But then again, Lionel Jonson was not a very good communicator, and he was kind of cold and disconnected, like he said. So maybe what he said just didn't go through. You know what I mean? Like, it was just taken the wrong way.
That way, because the Lion is a very taciturn dick of an individual. So I'm sure it was like, hey, you go back there. You're in trouble. You go in that corner, mister. Rather than saying like, hey, I'm sending you back here because you pissed me off, but also because I know you are the best man for the job. Had that happened, I'm sure it would have gone a lot differently. But amongst a few other kind of exploits here, and I don't want to get into too many of the little nitty gritty of what happens in the Horus Heresy. I mainly want to stick along what happens with Lionel Jonson, even despite some of his kind of covert little side missions that happen. But before the Horus Heresy breaks out, Lionel Jonson is kind of not the best of friends with Leman Russ. In current day 40k lore, the Space Wolves and the Dark Elves Dark Angels, now that I've said every single race, hate each other. And there's this time where they're willing to fight together, but it's mostly begrudgingly, and it's really for the greater good. They even have honor duels each time both armies need
the greater good. What kind of Tau mentality is this?
To share the field. So it's kind of like a, hey, remember that time that our Primarchs fought? You're best champion, my just best champion. We're going to duke it out, and it's going to be just like the same thing. I'm going to wear a really cool wolf headdress, and you're going to have wings on your head. But essentially, on the planet of Dulan, the leader called Leman Russ the Emperor's lapdog. And this promptly pissed off the Space Thane, and he went in for a thorough ass-kicking. But before Leman Russ could even get there, Lionel Jonson teleported to the leader's chamber and executed him right as Russ showed up. And you know Russ is all about grudges, kind of like the Dawi, and he's all about honor. So this broke out into a fist fight that ended in Jonson tossing Russ through a table. And, you know, Russ being...
Tables, ladders, and chairs, ladies and gentlemen, WWE. Does Leman Russ just have a real affinity for hating other Primarchs? You know, he hates Magnus and Lionel Jonson, and probably a whole lot more.
This kind of space Viking kind of stood up and was laughing it off. He's like, this was ridiculous. Look at us, we're brothers, we're fighting over this. This is silly. Lionel Jonson did not take it that way. He took it as, oh, you're mocking me. Screw you. Punches Russ, knocks him out cold, takes the Space Marines, leaves the entire system. That's another bad taste in Russ's mouth. So that kind of begets their whole feud, their whole issue with each other. Now, there's one other thing before we really get into the meat of the Horus Heresy. The Lionel Jonson was passed up for title of the War Master, and that's kind of a bit of contention for him because he saw himself as the most likely to be the War Master. In fact, he was surprised that it wasn't even Sanguinius, because they always say Sanguinius is the most like the Emperor in so many ways, even in embodiment and in actual physicality, and he's got wings. So he didn't take it poorly, but he didn't take it well. He wasn't like, oh, you know what, Horus deserves it, good job on him. He was like, well, okay, that's what the Emperor wants. You know, just kind of that bitter stepchild kind of attitude. But it causes a lot of weird tension between Horus and the Lion, who weren't like firm friends to begin with. But, and that's another important fact, Lion's not a friend with anyone for the most part. We talked about how he feels he's one step above people and kind of removed from the equation. Sanguinius might be the only one who can really even talk to him on somewhat of an equal footing, and Sanguinius can do that with almost any Primarch. He's like everyone's best friend next to Horus.
Yeah, we knew that. We knew that Sanguinius is everyone's favorite, basically. And then Horus had to decide, you know, I'm going to turn into a traitor and kill him.
It's like Horus is like everyone's meaner older brother, but also kind of just has some tough love. Sanguinius is the one everyone really likes and always wants to talk to. But the War Master thing kind of didn't sit well with him. So when the Horus Heresy breaks out and Isstvan 5 happens, or Isstvan 3, then Isstvan 5 happens, the Lion is already kind of a little like, oh, okay, yeah, see, told you guys. Told you that Horus would do all this action. So he kind of gets involved with the Night Haunter, with Conrad Kurz, with the Night Lord.
You do not want to get involved with Conrad. That man is missing a whole shit ton of screws, ladies and gentlemen. You can go watch my reaction to him, man. He is missing a lot of screws.
And he doesn't have a direct interface with the Emperor like a lot of the Primarchs don't get that. They don't get to help the Emperor in the Holy Seat of Terra because of the machinations of the Horus Heresy. Horus has brought a whole half of the Legion onto his side to fight, or I'm sorry, a whole half of the legions to fight in his name. And he dispatches Conrad Kurz to keep the Lion eljonson away from Terra. And this begins what's called the Thramas Crusade. In Sagulasa, and that's really soon to become the Night Lord's home, the Lion and Conrad Kurz kind of have this parlay where they talk things over, because they had been having this kind of skirmishing back and forth, nothing really kind of coming of it, but they go on this planet to talk things out. And on the planet, they are accompanied by their honor guard. There's Alejos and Corswain for the Lion, and there's Shang and Sevatar to Conrad Kurz.
Even the names of Conrad Kurz, this guy's a fucking demonic dude. Just look at him, bro. He looks like he's something out of a horror film.
But both get in this kind of brutal melee. They immediately get to exchanging blows, and it's written out by Aaron Dembski Bowden in one of his many Night Lord books. But he goes into pretty much like the very eloquent way in which Conrad Kurz is very aware of his, I guess you could say, shortcomings as this kind of super being that's meant for war. He calls himself a savage weapon. It's really, really kind of like, ooh. He's like savage weapons, one and all. Too dangerous to be wielded without cost. That is all history will see of us. Like he's this very kind of dark, sinister individual, but because he knows his fate. He knows what he is. And Lion eljonson and him get in this brutal melee. And Conrad almost chokes out Lion before Corswain eventually stabs Kurz through the back. And Alejos is killed by Sevatar trying to hold off the two Night Lord honor guard. So it's this very terrible moment here where the two Primarchs have to be literally pried apart from each other and dragged back to their respective legions to kind of sit down and say, hey guys, you gotta stop. But both legions kind of fight in this bloody stalemate all throughout 3-5 years or so in this crusade. And around this time, Lion does a lot of things on the side. He reinstates Librarius. And this directly conflicts with the Edict of Nicaea. And this is an edict that the Emperor kind of said, hey, I forbid the use of Psykers because it'll draw demons. No. But the Lion eventually finds out that the only way to fight demons on equal ground is with Psykers. So he kind of reinstates them and says, this is a necessary evil, I'm sorry. But it was just very rare for someone who would unflinchingly follow the Emperor's word unto death. But that's just kind of a side thing that's worth bringing up because it's a very character-breaking moment for the Lion. Eventually, though, the Lion kind of launches this devastating surprise attack on the Night Lords, and he utilizes a Xenos piece of technology called the Tuchulcha. And there's a whole side story about how he gets the Tuchulcha, and again, that's not really worth bringing up because it doesn't go into a ton about who he is as a person. There's a whole side story about him interacting with Perturabo, about some certain siege pieces.
Perturabo, that's the dude who he was like Rogel Dawn's opposite, right? Because Rogel Dawn got instated to build the palace and he wanted to, and then he turned to chaos, I guess.
Again, not overly important to Lion as a whole, so I have neglected those and left those out. If you do know of those stories, that's why I left those out. But this effectively broke the back of the Night Lords. The Lion destroys a fourth of the entire Legion and mortally wounds Kurz. And there's this really cool part in the books where it talks about how Kurz is basically like interred on this med table, kind of holding on to life. And Sevatar uses his latent psychic abilities to shock him back to life. And they go and basically ram the Dark Angel's flagship. It's a pretty crazy moment. And from this, the Atramentar, which are the elite terminators of the Night Lords, they all storm the Invincible Reason, the Dark Angel flagship, and they're going through everything, trying to find Lionel Johnson and kill him, because Kurz is pretty pissed off that he was dealt quite a mortal blow. And eventually they actually end up getting captured by the Dark Angels as they whittle apart all of the attacking force. So basically you've got these imprisoned Night Lords on the Invincible Reason, and you've got the Night Haunter, you've got Conrad Kurz himself, who has stashed himself now in the bowels of the Invincible Reason, just kind of hiding out and killing off crew members and the such. So the Lion goes on like
That's back to what Conrad Kurz used to do on his own planet, just hide in the shadows and fucking kill people.
6-week hunt trying to find Kurz throughout his ship.
What?
And eventually they land in the Imperium Secundus. So there's this large ruin storm.
Those ships are probably fucking massive. So yeah, it took him 6 weeks to find the man. Lord have mercy, those ships must be either massive, which they probably are. And Conrad is just a skilled hider, isn't it?
It's raging across the entire...
And think about it 1 second. Conrad is 10 foot tall. The guy's massive. He's wearing armor, and he couldn't find him. That is insane, dude.
Galaxy, and it's preventing people from getting back to Terra. It's cutting them off. The light of the Astronomicon is hindered, and that's what's guiding guides people back home. So the Blood Angels, the Dark Angels, and the Ultramarines kind of rallied together at Imperium Secundus, which is essentially Macragge, which is the home of Ultramar, the capital of Ultramar, which is of course the system of the Ultramarines. And in this, the Lion is made the Lord Protector. And there's a lot of instances where the Night Haunter actually gets off of the Invincible Reason and starts harassing Macragge and starts doing a lot of things where he almost outright kills the Lion and outright kills it's really hard to pronounce his name for me. Robbie Gooley, so I'm going to call him Robert Guleman. And he almost kills both of them. But what happens is the Lion kind of gets crazed and incensed and dedicated to killing off the Night Haunter. And there's a lot of back and forth action here. He ends up capturing him at one point, brings him to this whole trial of the triumvirate, what it's called, with all three Primarchs there. He's got to be dealt with, and the Night Lord kind of defends his stance pretty well here. And they say, hey, you got to go, Lion. You've done too much. You've gone insane with this. So they kind of exile Lionel Johnson, the other two Primarchs, and he comes back at the last minute, right before they're about to execute Conrad, and says, hey, if he can see the future, which Conrad does have that ability, and he sees that he dies at the hands of an assassin sent by the Emperor, then the Emperor's alive, and we are now all heretics. Is basically what he tells the other two Primarchs who go, oh, you're right. And Sanguinius has premonitions as well. Sanguinius goes, you're right too. I know I'm supposed to die a totally different way. What am I thinking? So that's the abridged version of what happens. It's a much more drawn out and obviously more expansive situation. But what happens from then on is that Sanguinius and the Ultramarines try to make a break for Terra. And of course, the Blood Angels get there in not their entirety, but Sanguinius gets there enough to aid the Emperor in kind of the final fight, and we'll go into Sanguinius's hand in that when we get to Sanguinius.
Rest in peace.
But Dark Angels go on this kind of crusade of their own, and they go and attack every single homeworld of all of these heretics, of all of these traitor legions, and they eradicate them. That's why you don't hear anything about these the traitor legions going back to their homeworld and their fully established systems. No, they went and waged their own war and destroyed everything. So for the most part, they did their own kind of behind the scenes work, and that's very indicative of the Dark Angels. They are very behind the scene. But eventually, Lionel Johnson goes to make his way back to Caliban, and remember, at Caliban, Luther is there. Luther is waiting. Luther has been...
Yeah, man, that was smart from them, though. They just eradicated all the traitors' homeworlds, which meant, hey man, there ain't no retreating for you, bro. The only place you can go is now dead or the warp. And that's pretty much what happened. Fulgrim, obviously Horus died, but Fulgrim, Magnus wasn't really part of it, to be fair. Mortarion, all of them, they just went back into the
supposedly rebuilding the Legion, sending new recruits out. But the second they get into the system, they're immediately shot on. Immediately. And we haven't gotten to this point in the Horus Heresy, so we don't know how expansive this is going to get. But from the older stories and older codexes, we know that this breaks out in this giant orbital warfare where Luther is trying to bring Lionel Johnson down. Lionel Johnson is smashing apart the defenses of Caliban, and he gets onto the planet, and Luther and Lionel Johnson have this titanic melee, this giant kind of fighting that very much echoes the Emperor and Horus. And eventually Luther kind of uses a psychic ability or some sort of ability that mortally wounds Lionel Johnson. And when in doing so, this kind of releases a haze from him, because he's been corrupted by chaos wholly now. He's been empowered by chaos to the point where he can actually reach Lionel Johnson's level. So he is on that same kind of Primarch level. That's something we see.
I was about to say, how the hell could Luther fight about the chaos upgrade?
Here, as a repeating motif across the Horus Heresy, Horus is ascended to the level that he can now compete with the God Emperor after, well, there's a whole side thing about that. I'll go that into Horus's video. There's a really cool part about what causes that. But with Luther and Lionel Johnson, this releases this haze from Luther where he's like, oh my God, what have I done? And Lionel Johnson kind of gets the rest of the monastery that they're fighting in falls over both of them. And Caliban is constantly bombarded by the Dark Angel's fleet to the point where the whole entire planet starts to crack and fall apart, and not really explodes, but just kind of destroys itself. And the Dark Angels find Luther, and he's kind of mumbling to himself in madness, saying that the Watchers in the Dark took Lionel Johnson. They'll have him they'll bring him back at the end times, which is, again, something we're going to see with a lot of these Primarchs, is the Arthurian legend of when they need him most, he shall cometh back. And that's gonna happen, I promise, guys. He's not the first to hear about this.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, man. I have that theory, like when it comes to that final end battle, man, everyone's coming back. Maybe not Horus, but maybe not Sanguinius, but everyone else.
And the Watchers in the Dark take Lionel Johnson, blow what is called the Rock, what is the largest piece of Caliban left, which becomes a fortress monastery of the Dark Angels, and it's fitted with warp engines so it can actually traverse the galaxy. But deep down in the Rock resides Lionel Johnson. And the big secret behind the Dark Angels is that they did have a schism, that they did have a betrayal, where Luther led a portion of the Legion against the rest of the Legion. So this is a secret that is suppressed from the rest of the Imperium. No one knows about this. That's like, as you climb the ranks of the Dark Angels, you start to find out more and more and more. You're given more as you include yourself into different circles. And those circles are
This is a cool fucking diagram, by the way.
Actually from the Knightly Orders as well. So this is that origin kind of seeping into their Legion as a whole, their Space Marine chapter as a whole. But what we find out here is that as the higher you go up, the more they say, okay, well, hey, now that
3.4 kilometers long.
you're Grandmaster of the chapter, the lion may or may not be dead in stasis somewhere, may or may not be dead somewhere in stasis below the rock. But don't tell anyone, you son of a bitch, because only the chapter master knows that. And it's kind of like with Robo Gilman of the Robo Girly Man, as I've also heard. The Ultramarines, he's in stasis, kind of like waiting. And we know that he's now come back to life in the 8th edition. So maybe we'll see him here with the 8th edition. I've heard a lot of rumors. I've seen some suspected army lists and stats of him coming back to life. Maybe we'll see Sanguinius. Who knows? Maybe even Leman Russ. But a lot of the loyalist Primarchs had very enigmatic and mysterious deaths, or deaths that were just kind of like, he'll come back when we need him, I promise. So maybe we're going to see that with Lionel Johnson. So one thing I do want to cover before we end our video here is the kind of dichotomy between the Night Lords and the Dark Angels. There's a lot of parallels. The Dark Angels are all about justice and duty. When they're on the other end of that coin, the Night Lords are about justice being inflicted through fear, whereas obviously the Dark Angels are inflicted through martial law for the most part. Like they actually inflict martial law upon a planet of Macragge just to go and find Ultramar, just to go and find Conrad Kurz. So they're very much about this militant, kind of disciplined approach to justice, and things are very black and white, it almost seems. But with the Night Lords, of course, it's all about fear and fear mongering and terror. But the Night Haunter and and Lionel Johnson fight a whole lot. They fight a ton, but it's kind of funny that they both kind of have this kind of similar end. Conrad Kurz goes back to his home and sees the same kind of, not necessarily the same kind of thing, but almost like a betrayal of the founding notions of the Legion, and destroys his homeland. He destroys his entire home planet. So it's a very interesting kind of end to both of these legions that kind of revolve around each other so much during the Horus Heresy. It's very interesting. The Dark Angels now have this dark past that they have to atone for. They call themselves the Unforgiven. This is the name that they've given to themselves and the rest of their successor chapters. And they essentially have to find the fallen angels. These are the angels that followed Luther during his kind of grand betrayal of the Dark Angels, of the chapter itself, of the Legion itself. So
wait, so did Luther, once he quote unquote killed Lion, did he just run off? Or did he die? Or what happened to Luther?
The librarians of the Legion are actually charged with getting the repentance of these fallen angels, and one of those fallen angels is Cypher. He's probably the most well-known of the fallen angels, and it's even rumored that he is Zariel, who we've talked about before, and he's maybe even imbued with one final mission by the Lion to do. There's another talk that the sword on his back is the Lion's sword, the sword of Lionel Johnson, and as part of repentance, as part of his kind of grand mission, he has to bring this sword to the emperors, to the Golden Throne, and essentially atone for all of the Unforgiven and the fallen angels at one time. Like say, hey, listen, this is what we've done. And there's a part actually in the new 8th edition that talks about how Cypher helps break Girly Man out of the Karos Faith Weaver's prison, and he says, hey, I'm going to do this, but you have to let me go and have an audience with the Emperor. And Girly Man says, yeah, sure, and then eventually kind of imprisons him. But Cypher, being Cypher, who is this kind of like the ultimate get out of jail free card type individual, gets out of prison. But this gives
he's a jailbreaker. Have you seen that film with Sylvester Stallone? I don't recall what it is, but he breaks out of prisons. Yeah. The ultimate prison, the prison breaker Alsa, bro. That film's kind of trash, but it's kind of good at the same time. I think it has Arnold Schwarzenegger as well. Yeah, it's alright, it's alright.
Gives you at least an idea of the level of clandestine activities that the Dark Angels have to ensue or have to pursue. Definitely a very secretive part, CIA type part of the Dark Angels. And it gets you a pretty crazy idea of what this Legion's like and where its kind of roots come from. And now when you play the Space Marines chapter of Dark Angels, you get a lot of that kind of mystery, but also that disciplined fighting force that you get from their army book and their codex when you read through it. But hopefully this gave you guys a really good idea of Lionel Johnson. There was a lot packed in this video, and I tried to condense it down as much as possible to make.
Alright, so that is a nice little intro to Lionel Johnson. I mean, he doesn't always go fully in depth with these guys, because obviously there's a whole ton of side stuff that he doesn't mention. So yeah, man, this was very interesting just to get to know the basics about Lionel Johnson, because I've had him mention he hasn't really been at all involved in the TTS series. So yeah, I knew like the basics about him. I didn't know anything more. It's nice to get that base knowledge, and we will be moving on. I think Leman Russ or Angron will be next. They're definitely both queued up in my playlist. But yeah, we'll see, man. You guys let me know who you want next. If you made it this far in this long video, man, thank you all for watching. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe. And yeah, I'll see you all next time.